Hi everybody! Since it is the fall and there's a lot of people that are filling out their Fafsas right now, going back to school, I thought this would be a great time to talk about Fafsa abuse. So if you've never heard of this term, which I have coined, and you're wondering what it is, I would consider Fafsa abuse a type of financial abuse performed by parents. So when you are 18 years old, from 18 to 24, even though you are a legal adult, when you're filling out the paperwork to request either a Pell Grant from the government or subsidized loans, unsubsidized loans, whatever, the government requires that you insert your parents' tax information in order to complete that form, even if they are not taking out any parental loans, which are the Parent Plus. So the Parent Plus loan, the parent is responsible for. That's the parent borrowing money for their child's education. But the regular, subsidized and unsubsidized loans are not in the parent's name. They're in the child's name, and the child is the only one responsible for paying them back. But you still need your parents' tax information to fill out the Fafsa. So it's kind of weird, right? Because they have to put in, I think at one point they have to put in their, I don't know what it would be, whatever number it is. I don't think it's an EIN. It's something like that. There's some number that you get from your tax form. But they're not actually responsible for paying off any debt. So, but in any event, I understand why the government does this. The government has this policy in place to make sure you don't have very, very wealthy, privileged 18-year-olds that are saying, hey, give me financial aid based off of my income alone, not my parents', and they look much more needy than they really are. That's the reason why the government has this policy in place. But the door is open to so much abuse because what has happened in my life, personally to me and to at least two other people in my family, was our parent used the Fafsa as leverage or as a bargaining chip because they knew that we needed the Fafsa filled out in order to continue paying for college, even though we were the ones taking out, the loans and all of that. So they would use it as a way to control our actions and our behavior. And if we did something that they didn't like or didn't approve of, they would just not give their information. And this is a nuanced thing, right? Because other people might say, well, you're not entitled to their tax information, which is kind of true to a certain extent. However, the way that this is set up, you cannot fill out this form without it. But the parent can choose to not give this it's like an 8-digit number or whatever, for any reason. They could just not feel like it and not give you this number. So this was used to sabotage my education and my, obviously, subsequent financial prospects. I had to drop out of school when I was 19 years old. Excuse me, I'm a little hoarse this morning. And I was only able to go back to school when I was 24. Because when you turn 24, that is when you're considered an independent student by the government, and you no longer need your parents' tax information. Now, keep in mind, I had been financially independent from my parents since I was around 18 and a half years old. So it didn't matter that I was independent from them. I was working, I lived with my sister for a while, but then from like 22 onwards, I didn't even live with anyone else, any roommates or anything. I had my own job, sometimes two jobs, my own apartment, my own car. All my bills were just paid by me, right? So I was an independent adult, financially self-sufficient, but the government did not see me as such until I turned 24. So I had to actually wait to go back to school, and then I did at 24 years old. And is it the end of the world? No, but I have lost out on making more income because, once I went back to school, I work 2 different jobs now. So with the one job, I more than doubled my income, my hourly wage. And with the other one, it increased by, I'm trying to think of what percent. Let me check this here. The other job, my hourly wage increased by around 29%. So suffice to say, because of the education that I got, my earning potential went up a lot. And also the types of jobs I can do now are much more suited for me, my personality, my health, my needs. So not being able to go back to school for that, what would that be, 5-year period basically, held me back. I'm still able to achieve my goals. I was still able to get an education, but everything was delayed. So my toxic parent did this on purpose to sabotage my finances and to sabotage my self-sufficiency. I guess that they thought that I would come crawling back, and they were trying to keep me overly dependent on them by basically pulling the rug out from under me. It didn't work, but it definitely made my life a lot harder. And my younger sister, she had been going through this process recently, and the toxic parent again was waiting to sign it until the very last minute, making it contingent upon her doing all this other stuff for them, constantly threatening to not sign it. It's really a horribly stressful situation to be in when you're a young student and you have this person that's just going back and forth. Well, maybe I'll do it. Well, maybe I won't. Well, maybe And I also want to point out, I forgot to say earlier, that a lot of private schools use Fafsa. It's not just public schools. And a lot of merit-based scholarships still require that you fill out the Fafsa. So you might think, well, you'd still be eligible for, something based off of your artistic talent or your test scores or something like that. Not necessarily, because often in the applications, they still require you to link your Fafsa. So it is a gate. It is a gate that you have to go through 99 times out of 100 in order to access funding for college. So the only other times that a student is considered independent before 24, there's a list of reasons that you can see on studentaid.gov. One reason is if you have dependents that you take care of more than 50% of the time. So that could be your own child. That could be someone who is your legal dependent. So let's say if you're maybe 22 years old and you have custody of a sibling, something like that. If you're active duty military, not in training, if you're in the National Guard and you are deployed, basically, like you're not doing a drill or in training. If at one point, I don't know if this is still the case, if you were pregnant, you would be considered independent. If you are married, you're considered independent. If you are an orphan, or you had become a ward of the state at some point, there's some exceptions that are kind of tricky, I guess, because one thing it said, well, if you were under someone else's legal guardianship, then you could file as independent, but not if you were just in their custody. So there's all these fine lines and details. You have to kind of look at the list for yourself. But there are some ways to get around FAFSA abuse. I mean, the best way is to marry one of your friends, because that legal marriage will make you financially independent. Now, can you do this in a way that's not fraud? I would say yes. Pick a friend that you will make your life partner for that time, not a romantic partner. I do not consider that fraud, because marriage does not need sexual component to be a legitimate marriage in the eyes of the law. Have a lavender marriage with one of your friends. I think that's probably the best way to go around this. You can file for a dependency override, but they are notoriously difficult to obtain. And often they contact your toxic parent in the dependency override process, which, if you're trying to avoid further abuse, that's basically kicking the hornet's nest. Doesn't make sense, right? So I would say legal marriage. Military is a tough one. If you really want to join the military, I'm not going to tell you not to do it. But if you are coming from a toxic family system and you're going into the military, guess what? There's a lot of toxic people and toxic leadership in the military. Are they everywhere? Not necessarily, but it's not known to be the most healthy, psychologically healthy environment. So that's a kind of proceed at your own risk. I obviously do not recommend getting pregnant for the sole purpose of being able to afford school. But again, if you already wanted to have a kid and you're, 22, 23 years old, maybe it could be worth it to you. That's your own decision. So there's ways to deal with this. But the bottom line is, it is a form of financial abuse because the abuser is seeking control by withholding something that would help you get an education and help you do better for yourself and financially support yourself. And they do not want you having power. They do not want you having the ability to make your own money and be financially solvent. They want to have you dependent on them so that they can do whatever they want to you and make you their lackey, basically, make you do whatever they want and put you in a place where it's hard to say no because they're holding something over your head. So I hope that this has been a enlightening conversation. It's a tough thing to talk about because it's frankly just completely unacceptable. But a lot of people go through this, and there really needs to be government reform to stop this from happening because it's unacceptable that young people's educations are being sabotaged by toxic, controlling parents. If you would like more information about things of this nature, how to deal with Fafsa abuse, how to deal with a toxic, narcissistic, or controlling person in a dysfunctional family system or any dysfunctional system, feel free to go check out my ebook. I'm so excited about this. This is called the Scapegoat Survival Guide, and it's not officially published yet. It's going to be out October 1st, 2025, but it is available for pre-order on Amazon. So check that out. There's going to be some personal stories. There's going to be some offensive strategies for help dealing with different types of abuse. There's going to be defensive strategies, exit strategies, and a lot of personal work reclaiming your identity after abuse, because this kind of abuse, whether it's Fafsa and financial abuse or emotional, psychological, whatever the case, this kind of abuse really wears away at a person and can erode your sense of self and your identity and your self-esteem. So I'm writing this book to give you a tool to help you, because I know just how hard it is to kind of find yourself again after this type of abuse and control. So I hope you enjoy this video. Definitely check out my other videos, and I'll talk to you next time.